environmentally on our own land. There's a lot of education and outreach going on. The same committee asked for more, and that's fine. The more the better, I think. There's so much to learn about the environment. There are a lot of organizations already giving us information. Habitat Acquisition Trust has a Good Neighbors program. They'll come and look at your property and tell you what you can do to make it better, or what parts need looking after. It's all voluntary. Of course, there's the huge Saanich Parks Pulling Together program that has many, many volunteers, has been mentioned, but it also gets a lot of support from Saanich Parks people. And that's not free. Saanich Parks are paying for that, looking after the environment in their parks. Stream keepers, lake keepers, Victoria Natural History Study Group, UVic, Camosun Horticultural Center of the Pacific, they all have education programs. It's very easy to find out more about, but never, I think, does any of us know all about the environmental benefits of our property. I'd like to look at it slightly differently and talk about the costs of not having an EDPA and the problems that that can make for the neighbors. One person already spoke about this, but I'm going to give you an example from our property. As I say, we are in an EDPA area now, but when we've been there for 45 years, about 35 years ago, I suppose, a road went in on the hillside opposite us, and 4 lots were created up there. And these are 10-acre minimum subdivisions, so they're big lots. On our property was an ephemeral stream, one that just runs in the winter. And it was a lovely little stream. It came down through the field, and it would turn up, if you like, about in October, November. Around the time you turn off the outside tap so they won't freeze, there was the little stream coming through the field. So if I needed to wash off my shovel, I had a place to do it. It would disappear in the summer. We had neighbors' cows in the field. Then in went the subdivision up above. I won't tell you what my mother said, but this is more or less the thing. They were building a house on one of those lots, and the bulldozer operator or excavator operator, whatever, came down to ask for a drink of water, which was fine. He said, "I'm just up there filling in that old swamp." Well, that old swamp, of course, is a very valuable small wetland, not protected by the
Mary, you're at 1 minute.
1 minute, okay. It wasn't protected by anything in those days, and so it got filled in. Now, we have a great deluge whenever it rains in the fall, a whole depression and washing away of the soil. We can no longer keep cows in the field. We couldn't keep our apple trees. All of these went. We had to spend an incredible amount of money to try and solve this problem, which with a series of dams, rubber liner streams, recirculating pumps looks pretty, but boy, it's not cheap and not nearly as nice as the little stream. So I think please keep the EDPA, make some renovations if you have to. It's an important thing. And don't let it go, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I'd like to invite number 14 up, please, and ask number 19 to come down on deck.
Good evening. I'm Pat McGuire at 3050 Admirals Road. I spoke at one of your other meetings, and my mind hasn't changed. I bought this property about 11 years ago, and when somebody comes along, which the municipality has done, I shouldn't say somebody, the municipality, has come by and confiscated my land, I consider it theft. And my take on the whole thing, we can sit around and BS a lot one way and the other, but being an area manager for BC Hydro. If I came in and expropriated your land and put in a power line, you'd be taking me and the hydro to court. So my suggestion here is, these people sitting here that are opposed to the EDPA, we quit fooling around. We go to court and we settle this thing once and for all. There is tree bylaws in effect, and I have an oak tree on my property. And when I was doing some work, I had a fellow come by that was going to do some work on the property, and we discussed it that that tree couldn't be cut down. And it's still there, it's maintained. But I think that we have to go further with this. We can fool around for the next year, and we could do just like we're doing with the sewer system. It could go on, and it might be 10 years from now, we're still screwing around. So I think it's time that we take the bull by the horns, deal with it, and if that don't work out, I don't know what to say, because I know my property's been evaluated, and my grandkids who are going to get the property when I pass on are going to take a ticket and get a good kick in the teeth. So I just don't appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pat.
Just one thing. I didn't take my full time, so the next person can take my portion of the time.
Aren't you lovely? Thank you. We actually have someone who's joined us who was at the last meeting but did not get a chance to speak. So we're going to invite this gentleman up, and then we'll carry on with our regular numbering. Okay, so you have five minutes. The green light will go on, and it'll turn orange at 1 minute, and I'll prompt you.
Excuse me, I'm a little bit nervous. Mayor and council members.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you just say your name and your address?
Yes, my name is Tim Pilkington. I live at 1517 Cedar Glen Road. My property lies in your EDPA zone, which includes my child's playground, my shed, lawn, vegetable gardens, and part of our house. Our back fence property line runs approximately 120 feet along the famous Alberg property, as you all know it. I had one of your staff members over to inspect our property and to show me what the EDPA is protecting on my property. Not sure I really got any kind of a concrete answer other than it had to do with the interconnecting canopy of the oak trees. I was under the impression the oak trees are already protected in Saanich. I thought the EDPA was to deal with stuff on the ground, like camas, etc., like you stated in your EDPA info. I also questioned your staff members on the status of the Alberg property, knowing that it was already removed from the EDPA. I was told by your staff member it was a unique situation. I would like to know what changes 6 inches over the fence onto my property. Is it that my vegetable garden and tomato plants are unique and should be protected? I have had a biologist report done on my property and sent a copy of this to your staff. It clearly states there is no EDPA zone on my property, just lawn and garden under trees. I would also like to know from your staff what happens to the so-called interconnecting tree canopy when 1/3 of the trees get removed for the subdivision to go in. I would love to hear back from any of you and removal of my property from your EDPA zone. We feel if this problem is not fixed, compensation must be offered to owners of EDPA zone properties. Thank you.
Thank you all for your patience and sharing the time and letting somebody come from the last meeting. Number 15 up, please, and number 20 on deck, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Lynn Husted. I live at 3360 Owen in Saanich, rural Saanich, near Camosun College in Interurban. I'm speaking for myself tonight and also for my husband, Terrence, who couldn't be able to attend. I support keeping the EDPA atlas and bylaw while review is taking place to improve it. Sure, there are some sites that should not be in the atlas. Sure, there's some improvements that can be made, but there are many sites that should be in the atlas and would be at risk of development if the bylaw or atlas is removed while review is taking place. Before the November town hall, a notice with bright pink tape was posted on our local community mailboxes warning that EDPA would reduce our property values. Also, there was and still is a Wilkinson and West Saanich sign alerting me to the fact that Saanich was taking away my property rights. This was the first time I had thought about the EDP since 2012. In 2012, my husband and I invited a consultant hired by Saanich to assess our property for potential environmentally sensitive ecosystems, or ESAs. We bought the property 30 years ago based on its natural, beautiful woodland forest and hope that it will remain so in the future. We saw the EDPA as a way of making that happen. The goal of the 2012 project was to identify and field check sites that would have been too small a scale to be picked up in the 2002 photos from the earlier SEI project. The project was conducted in a scientifically sound way with a technical advisory panel which included experts from 2 provincial ministries, the Canadian Wildlife Service and the Garry Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team. I was confident that it was a good 2012 project. The study identified one area, a rocky knoll with scrubby oak and native herbs on our property as an ESA. Like other 2012 ESAs, it is not included in the current atlas. However, the November notices about property values and restrictions on rights made me curious about the implications of having the ESA in the EDPA in the future. Due to concerns about restrictions on use, I looked up what I could and could not do if the ESA was in the atlas. I found a long list of exemptions. I really couldn't believe all of them, 18. At first I thought they applied to the buffer, but no, the exemptions apply to the ESA itself. Amongst other things, I could build a shed, a gazebo, install a picnic table, cut down a hazardous tree, and no permits were required. Most important for us, we could continue to do what we already do, pull invasive broom, walk on the trail to the top to watch the sunset, and install a bench. It was definitely not a no-go zone, as I'd heard. The reality is that the major restriction on current use and property value is the zoning. Our property is zoned as single-family use on a rural area, no subdivision allowed. These are the big restrictions on our use of the property and value of the property. We are quite happy with these restrictions because we value the resulting beauty of our neighborhood, and the zoning provides some certainty that the neighborhood will retain its natural beauty. Given the zoning, I don't think including the ESA and EDPA would decrease our property value at all. I suspect that's the case for many properties. However, I appreciate that Saanich has hired a very well-qualified land economist to research this issue and report back in March, so we'll all be better informed. As a community, we're in a time of significant and accelerated change. There's less available land to develop and increasing numbers of people who want to live in Saanich. The way we manage this challenge in the next few years will be critical to the health and well-being in our community, and we'll be relying a lot on the mayor and councillor to help us through this.
You're at 1 minute then.
1 minute? Okay, Saanich has an official community plan with a vision. Somebody said this before. Saanich is a sustainable community where a healthy natural environment is recognized as paramount for ensuring social well-being and an economic vibrancy for our current and future generations. The EDPA law is critical to our community efforts to protect our local natural environment for future generations. How we move forward as a community is critical to us. To review and implement the EDPA is really important. Hopefully we'll do it with good information and constructive dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, I'd like to invite number 16 up, please, and number 21 on deck.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Cairns. I'm a property owner in Saanich at 1257 Maywood Road. About 40% of my property lies within the EDPA. Our property was purchased about in 2005. It adjoins a Gary Oak Meadow Park, and about half of the backyard is a Camas Meadow. And this was a big reason why we were drawn to buy this property. I am directly beside two properties on which homes are being built. In fact, the lots were cleared and bulldozed within the last month. And I can't tell you how very, very grateful we have been that the EDPA has protected the most distinctive ecological features on these two properties directly beside us. I strongly support the Saanich Official Community Plan's goal to continuously restore and protect the natural environment and minimize the impacts on the built environment. And I support the EDPA as a critical tool for implementing this goal, and a tool that is in place in numerous other BC municipalities. We're not the only municipality struggling to figure out how to find new ways to bring human activity in better harmony with the environment. As a landowner of property within the EDPA, I certainly have had to read the rules very carefully and adapt some of what I might otherwise have done on our property accordingly. And I have had to do a lot of research and a lot of learning about native species. But I do this willingly, as my very small part in the global struggle to protect the biodiversity in this amazing land where we live. Biodiversity loss is not something that is only happening in the Amazon or Malaysia or other exotic places. It is also happening right here in our community. And we, along with the billions of others in the world, must change our ways to protect and restore the biodiversity that remains. If this means that I spend a day a year removing invasive ivy, or that I plant native species rather than exotics, if this means that I need to choose a softscape option in my backyard instead of a hardscape, surely this is not too much for me to step up to. It's my very small contribution to responding to the needs to protect ecological integrity on which biodiversity depends. I believe that when the time comes to sell our property, there'll be many willing home buyers who will see additional value to a property that is carefully tended, thoughtfully managed, and situated in a zone where other properties are managed the same values. I apologize. In brief, I support the EDPA as an appropriate and much-needed local policy, and I thank Saanich Council for their leadership in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone who's standing at the back, there are plenty of seats if you feel like having a seat. Just come on in. There's lots right up front if you like. I'd like to invite number 17 up, and if we could please get number 22 on deck here.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and staff. My name is Deborah Curran. I'm a professor at the University of Victoria in the Faculty of Law. I teach municipal law, and I also teach real estate law. I'm a landowner with properties in the EDPA here in Saanich, two of them, one out in the one in the Blenkinsop Valley in a suburban setting, 1249 Pierce Crescent, where I live, and also one of the properties on Todd Flats. Both of these are in the EDPA. And I have a somewhat unique perspective on the EDPA as I've written two different editions of the Green Bylaws Toolkit and have spoken with municipal staff across the province, ecologists, consultants, and others who have worked with EDPAs in their various jurisdictions over the last 20 years. And so bringing that to this particular conversation here in Saanich, where I live, I'd like to make two submissions tonight, and in particular, I'm happy to make a submission about the law of EDPAs because I think there's a lot of misconception about what it is Saanich does and other municipalities do by regulating properties for a particular value. My first submission is that Saanich's EDPA regime is entirely within the law of British Columbia. There is nothing wrong with it. The discretion that is exercised by council and staff is not what's called a taking or an expropriation of property rights. And my second submission is that if we go down the road of looking specifically at changes in the value to properties when we make municipal decisions, that is a very slippery slope that you're not going to want to constrain your discretion around. So you would then need to evaluate every single zoning decision that comes before you, or the way in which you set your garbage fees, on whether or not it has an impact on property values. And that's not your role in the broader public interest, I would submit. So in working with municipalities across the province for the last 20 years, we're looking at larger conceptions of climate change. How do we do integrated watershed management? What is the way in which we move forward as communities to ensure that we have a functioning ecosystem on public and private lands? And it isn't focusing on a single tree. It's let's bring it back up to the 10,000 foot level and say, is our EDPA regime fulfilling some of the goals that are set out in the official community plan, which is, as you know, partially protection of the natural environment and preserving our sensitive ecosystems. So turning to my first submission, I just will quote a few sections of the Local Government Act to you, which you know very well, but I think it will demonstrate that what you're doing is entirely within the law of British Columbia. So the first is Section 488, where you get your authority to establish EDPAs. And it says an official community plan may designate development permit areas for one of the more of the following purposes. And the one we're concerned with is protection of the natural environment, its ecosystems, and biological diversity. So I'd like to point out that where you designate EDPAs does not have to have a sensitive ecosystem value on it. It is simply in furtherance of protecting biodiversity and ecosystems. Therefore, in support of the EDPA, I would encourage you to blanket the entire rural area and non-urban part of Saanich as part of the EDPA in furtherance of protection of the natural environment or its ecosystems and biodiversity. That's well within your authority and well within your discretion, rather than focusing on whether or not there's actual camas under a single Gary oak tree. The second thing I'd like to point out is Section 458 of the Local Government Act, which you have had repeated to you continually in your service as councillors, because you get trained in this way. And it is explicitly...
You're at 1 minute, Deborah.
Thank you. There is no compensation payable to any person for any reduction in the value of that person's property as a result of the passage of a bylaw or the issuance of a land use permit. So we don't have this notion of expropriation by regulation in Canada. In fact, Justice Cromwell, who now sits on the Supreme Court of Canada, wrote in a case not very long ago, in this country, extensive and restrictive land use regulation is the norm. Such regulation has, almost without exception, been found not to constitute compensable expropriation. So I would encourage you to continue to improve the Saanich EDPA regime, which is now slipping. It's no longer the best in the province. And keep up the good work of looking forward to protecting for climate change and biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite number 18 up, please, to speak, and number 23 to come down on deck.
Mayor, Council, Audrey Barnes. I live on 140 Kiowa Place in rural Saanich, off of West Saanich Road. We've lived in Saanich for 56 years, 38 years on the family farm in Wilkinson Road, when the area became too developed with traffic jams in Wilkinson becoming impossible. We moved to rural Saanich. If we want to live in a busy development, we would move to the city. But as we loved the protected green areas of rural Saanich, that's where we chose to buy our new home. When we received our EDPA notice for the property, I was delighted to see that the EDPA would be protecting the very environment and ecosystems that we love so much and chose to live in. At the last session, people were repeatedly bashing Saanich for exempting our parks from this. I have news for everyone. The parks belong to you, and Saanich does its best to manage them. If everyone who attended the last overflow meeting would get out for a couple hours once a week, as our group of pulling together volunteers has done for many years, there would not be the problem of invasives in our parks. The EDPA is designed to protect our beautiful Saanich, not for us, but for our children and their grandchildren to enjoy in the future. I hope the EDPA is successful in doing so. I therefore strongly encourage Saanich to keep the EDPA. So massage it if you must, but keep it, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. I'd like to invite number 19 up to speak, please, and number 24 on deck.
Hello, my name is Marie Beauchamp, and I live at 1055 San Marino Crescent. I want to thank the Council for hosting this event and allowing people to speak on this very important issue. I'm speaking today as a homeowner with 40% of my property within the EDPA, and I'm also speaking as a member of the Saanich Action for the Environment, which is an action group comprised of environmental scientists and legal professionals who are leaders of thought in the industry. Excuse me. There are also landowners who are also in part of the group who support the restoration and preservation of natural areas in our community. I live within the EDPA on one of the few lots in the Atlas that has subdivision potential. 8 years ago, when we bought our little haven, I fell in love with the mature Gary oak trees, the camas growing in our yard, the hummingbirds, the squirrels, especially all the different native birds that live on our property. It reminded me of the property that I also owned on top of Knockin Hill. To me, Saanich is one of the best municipalities in Victoria. Since the EDPA bylaw adoption 3 years ago, my enjoyment of my property has not been compromised. We still mow our lawn. I keep a really lovely vegetable garden, and we haven't gotten any notices to remove our kids' playhouses or our woodshed. Other than the notice of informing us of the EDPA bylaw, we haven't given the bylaw a thought at all. The reason for that is because we don't plan on developing. And I understand that if I wanted to go down the road of developing our property, we may have to jump through some hoops. Like hiring an engineer at my expense, maybe hiring a surveyor at my expense as well. To me, it's common sense that I would also have to pay for the cost of a biologist. This would ensure that the things I love the most about the property that I purchased will stay that way and be protected. It seems the most practical and cost-effective approach to all Saanich taxpayers, especially since there are just a few of us that have the ability to subdivide and we sit within the EDPA. I'm surprised that this issue has gotten as much traction as it has in the last few months, and I've been following this quite closely. It has reached a negative frenzy of misinformation followed with fear-mongering and propaganda, mailed directly to me as an EDPA landowner. No, I did not just wake up to my backyard being a park. It's very park-like in setting, I'll admit. It's beautiful. But no, I still have the rights and the exclusive use of my property as its steward or owner. That is until I stop paying taxes. Then I no longer own it. And no, the value of my property has not plummeted at all. In fact, my property value has increased to a surprising amount, as has most everyone else on my street as well. My neighbors have been selling, EDPA and all, at full asking price or more. If I was a developer, I could see how not having free rein to build whatever we would like on some land could be seen as a deterrent. But as a homeowner wanting to live in my community and raise my children here, I see minor restrictions to allow for natural areas.
At 1 minute.
As a positive for people wanting to live here. You only need to look at how Broadmead has managed to maintain being one of Saanich's most desirable areas to live in, even with all those restrictive covenants and bylaws about all their trees and plants. I believe that the reason we're all here today is really just misunderstanding and a little greed. There are municipalities in the province that have similar bylaws to protect their natural areas. Even development-hungry Langford has some policies to protect theirs. Why would Saanich entertain the notion that we would only apply the EDPA to subdivisions? Shouldn't we be striving to be as good or better than other municipalities, not worse? We don't need to repeal the bylaw, we need to strengthen it. I'd love to see it extend to all of Saanich so that no one homeowner can claim that they're being treated differently. Thank you.
Thank you. Invite 20, and could I please have 25 down on deck?
Good evening, Mayor and